Hanson, Scotty, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Hanging out here at JCW's. That's right. Grab yourself the burger, grab yourself the fries, the shakes, everything, and let's talk some NCAA tournament bracket as Ken Pomeroy is hanging out with us. Ken, how are you?
Doing great, guys. Always great to check in with you. Kind of a rare treat here to have you here, Scotty. It's been a few years since we've done it.
Thankfully, we got that Friday game, so I don't leave until tomorrow. So yeah, we've got a lot to talk about. We got a lot to break down. But what's this been like for you over the last week or so? Been busy, or is it just this thing kind of runs itself?
Well, it runs itself a little bit, but it's certainly been busy as well. I mean, this week is the peak of my existence and my popularity for whatever it's worth. And by the time Thursday rolls around, it drops off pretty quick.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk to me. So
I got to admit, though, and Scotty, you've probably seen the same, this has been the year of Ken Pomeroy. Like this, for one reason or the other, your name has been involved in a lot of different decisions and interest points and all the rankings. And has it been typically loud and noisy for you this year? Untypically noisy and loud?
Yeah, it has. I don't know what to attribute that to, but yeah, there's no question. I hear my name on TV a little bit more, or I hear secondhand from people who hear my name on TV. So nothing wrong with a little free advertising.
Yeah, no, you're getting that in spades for sure right now.
Yeah.
And you know, people that think that you hate their school too.
Absolutely, yeah. There's always 2 or 3 special fan bases every year that think I hate their school or think I changed the ratings formula to hate their school. It's it's always an interesting phenomenon.
It's got to be kind of nice, though, because you rest in all fact-driven. It's not like you're sitting there at the end of the night thinking about your opinion like, maybe I came too hard on that opinion. Like, everything you do is fact-driven, and you can say, hey, if you got a problem with it, let me show you the math.
Right, yeah. I mean, the ratings are all automated. It is funny. You'll see every year a group of people will look at the ratings and they'll say, Ken Pom's broken this year. Something's wrong with it. And it's like, I really don't change the formula from year to year. So to whatever extent it's broken, the sport itself is broken. It's nothing I'm doing to it.
Well, and it's interesting, too, because there's a lot of people that and I feel like, okay, I'm just going to take a step back. I feel somewhat responsible for a little bit because I sent out a tweet, and it was just an observation about how sometimes I'm just like, okay, I'm not sure how it works either because Utah State had beat New Mexico in a big game up in Logan and yet dropped 3 spots in the rankings, and New Mexico went up. But you also have to take into consideration based on your projection of how that game was going to go, where you predicted Utah State was going to win. Right. And
they have to hit a certain number.
And they have to hit that certain number, And so that's what kind of plays into it. And I think a lot of people are like, how is this even possible? And it's like, okay, on paper you may think like, okay, well that may not make a lot of sense. But in reality, with the algorithms and the numbers and everything you put in there, it does make sense.
Right. It's a different system in that it's making predictions. That's the entire purpose of it. So sometimes, you'll have a situation where a team beats a highly ranked team at home by a couple of points and they don't move, and people get upset by that because they're used to the AP poll or some other ranking system that solely values wins, moving a team up in that case. But in my case, if you're favored to beat a team at home by 2 and you beat them by 2, the computer is like, hey, there's no reason to change these rankings. Like, the team did exactly what was expected. So, yeah, that goes into it. So teams aren't rewarded necessarily for pure wins and losses. They're rewarded for points per possession, adjusted for who they play and where the game is played. And so sometimes that can lead to some counterintuitive results.
Well, let's start with BYU because it feels like BYU's been a Ken Pom darling through a lot of the season in the rankings. Kind of walk us through where BYU started, where they ended, and why they kind of reigned supreme through the Ken Pom rankings.
Right. So, I mean, before the season started, I had them 36th in my preseason ratings, which I think was quite a bit higher than maybe most people felt, coming off a losing season. Probably had some
people like, what are you doing 36?
Yeah, coming off a losing season on the WCC. But, they brought back everybody. There was, the scoring margin numbers in the WCC last year were a lot better than the record. Like, they had the best ever scoring margin for a team with a losing record in conference, at least as long as my data goes back, which is 26 years. So their record was deceptively bad last year, returning just about everybody. And so there was some reason for a little more optimism than I think you saw from the preseason Big 12 coaches poll, which had them 13th or whatever. So that's where they started, and they rocketed up the rankings pretty quick. They started off the season pretty hot, beating San Diego State, beating NC State, losing a close one to Utah, and they've really been in the top 20 since mid-November.
When you look at that matchup against Duquesne, what really jumps out at you, and how do you expect that game to go?
Well, I would say BYU was done a huge favor by being given that opponent.
By the way, I love their draw. I mean, overall, yeah.
Right. So Duquesne as an 11 seed is really a historically weak 11. I mean, they're weaker than some 12s and 13s in this bracket. So I know BYU got moved down a seed line to make the bracket work for them and the schedule work for them. They deserved a 5. They got a 6, but they were done a huge favor in terms of who their opponent was. Duquesne really has, one of the poorer offenses in the entire tournament, and that's really where they struggle. They're a heavy defensive team, ranked 28th defensively, but 166 on offense is basically an average Division I offense. And so for BYU to draw that is a pretty nice luxury in the first round of the tournament. It's not, it's not a guaranteed win, but it's about as cushy of a draw as you can get for a 6 seed.
What do you think about teams that are making kind of their inaugural appearance since the expansion? Because Duquesne, Ken, this is their first showing since 1977. They haven't even seen a field this deep.
Yeah, that's wild.
It's crazy,
yeah,
right?
It is.
Scotty and I were looking at it.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'd heard it, but then we double-checked it, and I'm like, geez, this is a team that's never made it to the tournament. So,
it's wild.
Okay, so I know that Ken Pom rankings don't take these two things into consideration, but a coach that's saying he's going to retire after the season,
yeah,
and a team that's never been here to the expanded field. Like, what? How do you even draw something up for a team like that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The past history means a lot there. It's ultimately going to be it's only going to be decided by how good the players are and how well they play. But credit to Keith Dambrot, their head coach. I believe LeBron James High School coach. Is that?
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So he's had quite a career, and good on him for being able to retire on a high note. I had the privilege. I met him a few years ago, but I saw him in the off season, and he's just a super nice guy. And so it's good to see him be able to go out here and get a tournament bid for a team, as you said, that has enjoyed hardly any tournament success.
They do shoot, just looking at your numbers, and you look at BYU, the three-point attempt for field goal attempt, they're number 2 in the country. They all live and die by the 3, and sometimes that can lead to a good run in the tournament. Sometimes that leads to an early out if those shots aren't falling. Yeah,
the rare team that took more 3s than 2s this year, didn't shoot it particularly well, right around maybe slightly above the national average at 34.8%. And even worse than that in Big 12 play. So, they did struggle a bit to make shots in the Big 12. But, the good news is they're a solid offensive rebounding team. So they do get some of those misses back. And, I think the profile is great for a team like BYU. I mean, I think that's how you have to build a team at BYU. Get great shooters. They have, pretty good size and good shooters. They can space the floor really well. And, they're going to be a challenging team for, any opponent in this field to defend. As you mentioned, the shots do have to go in for them to win. But if they do, they have the power to win a couple of games here.
Can we peek ahead a little bit? What do you think of that matchup with Illinois?
Yeah, that's going to be a great matchup. I mean, Illinois is a team that doesn't play much defense.
Yeah,
they're involved in high scoring games left and right. Kind of suits BYU, I think, pretty well. They'll put some points on the scoreboard. It's going to be a matter of if they can, defend Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins. They're, Illinois' 2 high-scoring players. Can they contain that offense just enough? Because it's probably a game that's going to be played, in the 80s. It'll be one of the higher-scoring games in the tournament if that happens. And it'll definitely be an entertaining affair, whether you're a BYU fan or not.
I would definitely say, for all you degenerates out there, take the over on that one.
On BYU Illinois.
BYU Illinois.
I don't know if there are any studies out there, or maybe you might know it off the top of your head, but historically, three-point shooting teams, as they go into tournament play, do we see an increase in percentages made or a decrease in percentages made when the big show, the big dance is on?
Especially when you're playing in some of these like hockey, NBA arenas, and then when you get into the football stadiums, when you got the backgrounds that are way in the back, and there's some adjustment there.
Because BYU's headed into Omaha, Nebraska. It's Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah.
Headed into Omaha, Nebraska, the Health Center.
Right. That's a more traditional basketball venue. When you go to a dome, we do see an effect of maybe 1 or 2%. It's not huge, but the shooting is more difficult without the natural shooting background. The last couple of years, the issue has been that the NCAA uses a ball that is not used really by any actual team. So everybody's unfamiliar with the feel of the ball, and we've seen shooting percentages take a hit in the NCAA tournament the last 2 years. So.
Because the ball.
Yeah. I mean, that's the theory anyway. That's we didn't see this trend before they added the ball. So that could be an issue too. I memean,
what's the difference on the ball? Is it the texture of it?
Yeah,
the
it
size,
is the grippiness. The size is not hopefully not a difference in that, but the
logoing maybe. Or?
I think it's just the feel of the ball. How deep the grooves are, the stickiness of the ball.
In talking to Utah State was a lot like BYU this year. That's how Utah State was last year. They were a big 3-point volume shooting team, and talking to those players after the game. They were livid with that basketball.
Oh, really?
Oh, they were beyond upset with it.
Yeah, that seems to be the feeling, is that there's the ball is just like not what anybody is used to, and we see it in the shooting percentage. So I don't know how that's going to look this year. I don't know if there's any adjustments in that regard, but that is something to keep track of here when the games start.
I got to tell you, I wouldn't buy much into that, but one of my favorite conversations I ever had with Jeff Hornacek, I got to be pretty good friends with him. While he was helping with the Jazz, I was still playing professionally, got to know him a little bit. And I had a conversation with him about the details of shooting. And Ken, he told me that on a typical pass from Stockton or a typical pass from Bryant, didn't really matter. He could actually know or see the rotation of the ball, and he could catch the stripe on his finger. And he knew the feeling of the stripe so well that as he was catching it, before you could bat an eye or blink an eye, he would have that stripe or that divot in that finger at the exact shooting point that he's done 1,000 times. I was shocked by the details of a good shooter and how much they know where the pass is coming from and how to adjust the ball without even thinking about it. So I could see how a ball would play into it.
Yeah, the NBA is different from the NCAA. The NBA uses the same brand of ball for every game, whereas in the NCAA, the home team gets to choose. They can choose from a variety of approved balls, but the home team gets to choose what brand of ball to use. And so you can use slightly different equipment from game to game, which is pretty unusual.
All right, let's shift gears. We'll have the Utah State game as they take on TCU, an 8-9 matchup. I know, the committee essentially told the Mountain West, we'll give you your 6 teams, but you're not going to like your seeds. Utah State thought they deserved higher than an 8, but they get that 8-9 matchup with TCU. And, again, looking at your numbers and knowing Utah State, this is not a good matchup for Utah State. Like, what Utah State does poorly, TCU does very well. Utah State has struggled as of late, defensive rebounding. TCU is an elite offensive rebounding team. Utah State needs to shoot the 3 ball pretty well against TCU. They're not a good 3-point shooting team. I think Aggie fans should probably be a little concerned about this matchup.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, you nailed it down pretty well. This is a classic Jamie Dixon team at TCU, or going back to his days at Pitt. He relies on offensive rebounding. He's one of the few coaches that still stresses that, and their offense is generally unremarkable. But because they offensive rebound so well, they have a passable offense. So, if Utah State can keep them off the offensive glass, they'll have a shot here. This is not necessarily a mismatch by any means. It should be a pretty solid game. Obviously for Utah State, a lot of their offense comes on the interior, and so if Osibor can get off and have his typical game, then I think Utah State can take this, but it will be a really tough matchup, as you mentioned.
So, Ken, we kind of had a drive-by question thrown at Scotty yesterday from Brian Estridge. He's the voice of TCU. And he was on with us, and he said, well, yeah, I heard you guys talking about TCU beating Houston. Yeah, definitely a great win. And he said, and Scotty, tell us what would be Utah State's best win. According to KenPom.com and you, what is Utah State's best win, and how does it compete with, whether it's TCU's win against Houston or their win on the road against Baylor? How does it compete with those wins?
Right. Yeah, their best win was at Boise State, the overtime game back in January. And, nothing really competes with the win over Houston. Houston's a 1 seed, so it's going to be pretty hard to compete with that. I mean, I think the Mountain West provided solid competition this year. The top of the league was strong. You just don't have those elite teams that the Big 12 has, so you don't face that level of competition. But they faced good competition and performed pretty well against it. I mean, I think this is going to be interesting to see how the whole conference breaks down in this tournament. We've seen, the last 2 years, there's been a little bit of a disappointment, certainly outside of the San Diego State run. So there's a little bit of pressure, I feel like, on Mountain West teams, not just Utah State specifically, but certainly teams like Colorado State or New Mexico or Nevada. I think all three of those teams are favored in their first games. So, it's going to be imperative, I think, for those teams to get W's to, I think, justify nationally the 6 bids that they got.
In your opinion, just take out prior tradition or prior success, all that other stuff from the years prior, just focusing on this season and what they've done this season, did the Mountain West get hosed?
I mean, from a seeding standpoint, yeah, a little bit. I mean, it was especially surprising. Like New Mexico wouldn't even have gotten in had they not won the conference tournament, which was pretty surprising. But yeah,
that they won the tournament or that they got in?
No, that they would not have made the tournament.
Yeah, both. I mean, it's surprising to some extent that they won the tournament as a 6 seed. Obviously, they're a really good team, but the Mountain West was so tough. I think anybody who won it would be a surprise. But the surprise was that, when the seeds came out, it was apparent like they're seeded below any at-large team, so they would not have gotten into the NCAA tournament had they not won the Mountain West tournament.
By the way, I've got them beating Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, I have no problems with that. That's not an upset.
So do I.
Yeah, it should be a pretty nice draw for them. I mean, it's a great opportunity.
Well, I just the way that House is playing and Mashburn's playing and the rest of that team. I mean, just watching them up close, they're just crazy athletic. And the old adage, guards in March, and they certainly loaded with that.
Donovan Dent, he's an outstanding player. JT Toppin, one of the best freshmen in the country. So, it's a team where you really can't focus on one player. They got a number of guys that can contribute, and it should serve them well. I mean, I probably would say San Diego State is built the best to make a deep run, but New Mexico is a close second, I think.
I was looking at TCU's roster, and we were going over it with Brian Estridge, and there might be one clear individual on the roster that's kind of the standout, but I think he was second team Big 12. I think he was the only one to get Big 12 honors, wasn't he, Scotty?
Yeah,
on TCU's
I
roster.
so,
and I think it was second team Big 12. Ken, in the past, and as you work numbers and do your business, how much does it play in that Utah State has the Mount West Conference Player of the Year? They've got a clear number one, even though you could talk a little bit about Brown, and even Danny Sprinkle said in a comment, if Brown is not the Mount West Conference Player of the Year, he made a pretty pointed reference to it. But you've got a standout number one in Great Osborne. In your experience, those standout stars in comparison to a roster that doesn't really have a standout, how does that typically play out?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a trend. I mean, you do typically see, I think, true mid-majors that tend to rely on the one big scorer. I don't know that Osborne really is, he doesn't have that big a share in the offense. He's obviously a clear number one for the team, but he's not an overwhelming guy who they have to rely on to put the team on its back. So it can go either way. I mean, you can look at the teams that made the Final Four last year. I mean, I don't think any of them were dependent on one player. They all had kind of well-rounded lineups. So I think more often than not, those are the type of teams that have success. You do occasionally have the stories where, Carmelo Anthony carries a team to a title or whatever, but that was, 20 years ago. There haven't been a lot of cases since then like that. So, TCU's tough in that respect. They're also almost all seniors, right? So it's yeah. I mean, they're one of the most experienced teams in the country.
How much does that play into it too? You see any correlation? Because I think in D1 experience, they're number 3 or number 4 in college basketball. So how much is there any breakdown on how much that can help you in terms of making a tournament run. Ultimately, talent's what matters the most. But
right, yeah. I mean, it's hard to separate that from talent. The one thing that is tough to succeed with is a really young team. If you're all freshmen and sophomores, that's a really difficult blueprint. You do need some upperclassmen, in your rotation to provide some stability to the team. But once you have that, I don't think it really matters how, if your experience is off the charts or your age is off the charts. I don't know that it matters a whole lot.
Well, and honestly, it might work against you because if you have a lot of D1 experience, that means you're not good enough to go to the pros, because if you could, you would.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of the market, the corner as a coach, is like find those guys who are really good college players who can't quite make the jump. So I don't know that Jamie Dixon has necessarily gone that route. He doesn't necessarily have guys who are, super high recruits who are trying to get, going to have great careers in the NBA. But you do see that from some of these great teams that they get a guy who magically kind of sticks around for 4 years, who people thought maybe early on would have gone to the NBA.
So we were talking about this last year, and maybe we can hang on to this, but we can maybe get in a little bit deeper later. But last year, some of the best talent wasn't even in the NCAAs. You didn't have the Wembanyama, you didn't have the Scoots. And is it the same this year? Are we missing some of the greatest talent that's available?
No question. Yeah, I mean, it's probably even more dramatic this year. The 5 of the top 10 picks, I think, are going to be non-college players, and they're the best. Some of the best college players are in this event. Rob Dillingham at Kentucky, Reed Sheppard at Kentucky, Cody Williams at Colorado. I mean, those are some of the names that should get drafted pretty high. But for the most part, yeah, there's not a lot of marquee names in this event that we've seen, in the past.
Take a break, come back. We're live at JCW's. We are in Lehigh. We want you to come by, hang out, grab some food, and check out all the great menu items here, whether it be burgers, the wings, the cheese fries.
It's all good, man. How about the fish and chips? We haven't even talked about the fish and chips.
I've never had the fish and chips.
Oh, it's so good, man. Deep fried, big old chunks of fresh fish in a really nice batter with some of those fries, Scotty. And they've got fresh house-made tartar sauce that's just incredible. But I would suggest get the fries separate and get them loaded, whether you do the chili cheese fries or just the cheese fries. But that cheddar melted on top of the fries, so good. And their fry sauce is unique. It's original, and it's house-made. All of their sauces are house-made. Their ranch, their blue cheeses, all of it, the best ingredients, best sauces. And I know that we focus a lot on the burgers and the steak sandwich, and they do some great salads if you're into the salads. You were just getting the rundown on the burger salad.
Yeah, you can order any burger you want and say, I want it salad style, and they'll chop it up, put it in a tub, and you can have it essentially protein style.
But you can have your favorite burger. What's the Hawaiian burger or the double cheese or, these amazing burgers that they put together. But you got to top it all off with one of their amazing shakes. I mean, this is known as the shake place. If you're out there for a good classic shake, come in. You can get the mini, and the mini is not mini. It is gigantic. It will feed me. Okay, so the mini would feed me, but it would feed maybe 2 or 3 people on a given occasion. But great food here at JCW.
And again, a lot of locations, but we're here in Lehigh, so come by, hang out, and let's talk brackets with Ken Pomeroy right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I present?
This is JJ and Alex.
Mitch Harper, our BYU insider.
But I think this is a reasonable draw, all things considered, for BYU. And I know Cougar fans are probably discouraged to not see BYU get a chance to play in the Delta Center, and that's really not the big issue. I think it just comes down to getting dropped to a 6 historically tells you you're not going to make a run to the Final Four. There hasn't been a 6 seed that reaches the Final Four in 32 years. It's the longest drought among any seed line. You're almost as likely as an 11 seed to go to the Final Four as you are a 6. Six seeds have reached the Final Four. 5 11 seeds all time have reached the Final Fours. When people say seeds don't matter, it does matter. And, for Mark Pope, he's going to move forward and not worry about it because there's nothing that he can do.
Catch JJ and Alex afternoons from 3 to 6. Presented by G2G Bars on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
Number one.
Miss any part of the show? Every moment of every show is available in podcast form by searching Hans and Scotty on your favorite podcasting platform or online at KSLSports.com. This is Hans Olsen and Scotty G on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
People dream high in the quiet of the night. You know that I caught it. Bad boy, shiny toy with a price. You know that I bought it. Killing me slow out the window. I'm always waiting for you to be waiting below. Devils roll the dice, angels roll their eyes. What doesn't kill me makes me want you more. And it's new.
Hans and Scotty, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. In honor of Mark Pope, Matt Norlander went through and asked every coach in the NCAA tournament who their favorite musician is. And Mark Pope went T-Swizzle, went Taylor Swift. And by the way, Danny Sprinkle went with Prince, which I thought was a
great selection.
A great selection. I wouldn't have put Danny Sprinkle. I would have put him a little bit more on the countryside.
Creed?
I would not have gone here. Yeah, no.
Oh, on the countryside?
Countryside, yeah. But
little Old Dominion.
Let's give away some tickets right now. Call number 12, 801-575-ZONE. You win a pair of tickets. See the Jazz and the Mavericks at the Delta Center coming up on March 25th. You want those tickets? Be calling number 12 right now, 801-575-ZONE. I don't know. You surprised with a little Taylor Swift there, Ken?
I don't know. It actually kind of makes sense for Mark Pope, honestly.
Will that affect the numbers next year?
Might have to dock the team a little bit for that one.
Just drop them off the face of the earth.
Right.
I'm waiting for somebody to have Selena Gomez. I wouldn't mind it. A little Selena Gomez.
Nobody's going to take Selena Gomez.
She's better than Taylor Swift, though. You got to admit that.
No.
Would you admit that?
No.
Okay.
No, I would not admit that. Yeah, Kelvin Sampson was the only one who went with the Eagles, which would have been where I would have gone.
Where would you go, Ken?
I think I'd go Foo Fighters.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice call.
Very solid.
A lot of Dave Matthews bands coming up here. Chris Jans, even Richard Pitino.
Well, that means we got a lot of 90s coaches in there.
Yep. We do have one Old Dominion, Dan Monson of Long Beach State, who, again, that's one of the best stories of the tournament.
Right.
You get fired, and then you're like, all right, but we still need you to coach the team. All right, fine. I'll just go out and win my conference tournament.
Out of spite.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Did the
Just
old,
going to keep coaching.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll show you.
All right, let's go through some number one seeds. Your four number ones, UConn, Houston, Purdue, and you have to go all the way down to number 9 in your rankings. North Carolina picks up a number one seed. I know a lot of Kansas State fans are a little cranky about not being a number one seed. And Auburn you have as number 4 in your rankings. They're a 4th seed, but what jumps out? What surprised you the most with those number one seeds?
Well, I don't know. I think all those seeds were pretty much expected. I mean, yeah, Iowa State should have gotten more consideration than they did for a 1, especially after Carolina lost in the ACC title game. But the committee has a pretty strong history at this point of ignoring almost anything that happens in those conference tournaments from like Thursday onward. So, maybe it wasn't too surprising that the 1 seeds fell the way they did. The top 3, have separated themselves from the country pretty much all year. So, wasn't a lot of drama there. I think the real surprise was that, UConn, not that they got the overall number 1, but that they got placed in the toughest region. So they were really done no favors other than they get to play close to home, which is a nice perk, but they're going to have a very tough road to get to the Final Four.
Well, what makes the East the toughest region? I mean, as you mentioned, UConn, they're at the number 1, but what really separates that as the toughest region in your opinion?
Yeah, they're in there with Auburn, who is, as we mentioned, 4th in my ratings and the number 4 seed. So, really a team is playing on a 1 or a 2 seed level, and UConn's going to have to play them in the Sweet 16. And then the 2 and the 3 seeds are very tough as well. Iowa State and Illinois are both in my top 10. Iowa State has the number 1 defense in the country. All of those potential matchups as they get to the Elite 8 are going to be quite challenging as well. And we're just kind of glossing over the fact that they might have a rematch, or not a rematch, but a game against last year's Final Four team in Florida Atlantic in the second round. So just a number of, just kind of a minefield there for UConn right now. They're the best team in the country, but their road to getting to the Final Four is also clearly the hardest of all the number 1s.
Do you think that was done purposely or just how the seed list kind of played out?
Yeah, I just don't think the committee does anything purposely. I know we look at the bracket and we see matchups and we think, oh, they planned that out, but they're just so occupied. I mean, you did the mock selection, so you kind of have a feel for that, but they're just so occupied with trying to get all these teams in consistent with bracketing principles and get the seeds correct, and they just have so much work to do that they don't have time to tee things up like that. If they did, I think they would have, found a way to put St. John's in the field, right? Like that obviously would be a very juicy situation.
A St. John's, New Mexico matchup would have been nice. For
absolutely,
sure.
Yeah.
Just to stay on that East bracket with UConn for just a second, because it is the bracket that BYU sits in. A couple of other observations with it. You take last year's championship game in San Diego State and you throw San Diego State in the East. I don't know how much last year's experience plays into this year's game and matchups, but you're taking last year's champion run in San Diego State, throwing them in there, and then you're taking two of the Big 12's best and throwing them in the bracket. You mentioned 2-seed Iowa State, and of course 6-seed BYU is sitting in that bracket, so that makes it difficult. You throw in Auburn, and I can see why the East is just nasty.
Yeah, it's loaded. I mean, we're assuming, Auburn's going to make it to the Sweet 16, but obviously San Diego State can get there as well. It's a different team in that they have a one of the more prolific scorers that Brian Dutcher has ever had in terms of Jaden Ledee on the team.
Fantastic player.
Yeah, absolutely. But the DNA of the team is pretty similar. It's still just a defense-first team. The numbers are, scarily identical to last year.
Are they?
Yeah, so... they're still a 5 seed, and they deserve a 5 seed. I mean, they're not one of the best teams in the country, but they're also capable of.
What were they last year?
I do think they were a 5 seed last year.
Yeah.
They were a 5 seed last year.
I do think it's funny though that they had the same seed in the NCAA tournament as they had in the Mountain West Conference tournament as a 5 seed.
Yeah.
But they went 11-7 in Mountain West play. But I also think that's a team that can flip the switch because of what they do defensively. I mean, they can just turn it on at any given moment. They don't have the scoring necessarily across the board that they had last year, but Ledee is just, he's a phenomenal player. I want to shift gears. Let's talk about Houston. Houston just in that region with what they've got laid out in front of them in the South. Where does that South rank in terms of the hierarchy of the 4 regions? And can Houston make a pretty logical claim of having I don't want to say an easy path, but a decent path to getting to the Final Four?
Right. I think it's a good way to put it. The other 3 regions, I think, have their own weaknesses and flaws. They're pretty similar strength-wise. But certainly, you look at the 2 seed. I mean, Marquette's a little vulnerable in that Tyler Kolek has been banged up for them.
Yep.
Hasn't played lately, and it's uncertain exactly how healthy he'll be in the tournament. Kentucky as a 3 seed has become a very popular pick to come out of that region. However, defensively, they're just not good. I mean, that's putting it kindly. They're almost kind of a joke defensively. They're not ranked in the top 100.
Kentucky?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. So, a team that relies on younger players and very skilled players that can generate offense, but defensively they've just struggled to find an identity all year, and maybe that'll improve in the tournament, but there's only so far you can go from being outside the top 100, and so I don't have a lot of confidence in them. I mean, the real maybe challenging team for Houston could be Duke, who has been up and down this season. It is not a typical dominant Duke team. They're a 4 seed for a reason, but they do seem to be the most complete team outside of Houston in that region.
So just sticking kind of in that south region with Houston and what we're seeing there, the Big 12 with a 1 seed in Houston and a 2 seed in Iowa State, that's only shared with the Big East that has a 1 and a 2 seed. How dominant was the Big 12 just in terms of talent, in terms of big teams, big names, and a full conference, maybe in compared to years past or in comparison to the conferences that we have right now?
Right. I mean, they were pretty clearly ranked number 1 in my ratings among conferences. So that would be the 9th time in the last 11 years that that's happened. So, there's just this long trend of the Big 12 being the best conference in the country. That said, there was plenty of criticism from coaches in other leagues regarding some of the scheduling philosophies of the Big 12 teams and some claims that the Big 12 quote, gamed the system in terms of.
Yeah, you saw a lot of that. There was a lot of noise on that.
So, the tournament's going to be a little bit of a test of that. And there are some challenges there. Like, the top two teams in the league, Houston and Iowa State, like their profiles are kind of lopsided on the defensive side. And typically it's kind of a challenge for those teams to have a lot of success in the tournament. BYU had a great year, but historically, their tournament record is not great, right? Like
that's putting it nicely.
They've been to the tournament 30 times and they've won 15 games. So.
Way to soften that blow, Ken.
Trying to be nice.
Not great.
Kansas is banged up. Their two best players are hurt. So there are some challenges here. I mean, it's not guaranteed that the Big 12 is going to have a ton of success in the tournament. It is going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Is it fair to bang on a conference when they don't have a good showing in the tournament?
Well, I think tournament performance is overblown for the quality of a conference, but it is a factor. And when it's extreme, like if the Big 12, they have 8 teams, right, in the tournament. If they only send one to the second weekend, like I think the criticism would be deserved. You can't discount everything that happened in the regular season. Like the Big 12 was still a really solid league, but maybe they weren't, clearly the best league if that happened. So tournament performance matters. It's not the only thing, but I do think it's a factor.
All right, we'll take a break, come back. Coming up next, we'll continue on to look at some of the other number 1 seeds. North Carolina, maybe a bit of a surprise. Purdue, a potential second-round matchup if Utah State gets past TCU. So you might see Danny Sprinkle up against the Boilermakers in an 8-1 matchup if both can take care of business in the first round. So we'll take a look at the Boilermakers as well. Coming up next, it's your bracket preview show with Ken Pomeroy, Hans and Scotty, live here at JCW's in Lehigh, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
This is Jake Scott and Ben Anderson.
He's Coach Tim Lacombe.
Who do you like in the seeding? Who do you think has an opportunity to make a run?
It's an interesting one to me this year, but I would have to say that even though Houston got pummeled in that Iowa State game, I think Houston's got to be a team you look at. They've got a decent run. I think at the end of the day, guys, I think UConn wins. I think Bobby Hurley's done a great job assembling a team that can win a lot of different ways. And I just think even though it's going to be difficult, I think that they'll be a team that is there. And I think that even though it's real chalky, and I hate doing chalk, I think that's a team. I think Houston's a team. My outlier this year is Creighton. They're a 3. I kind of like where they're at, and I like the fact that they're old. They've been together for a number of years, and I think that will pay dividends in a kind of a splintered, fractured NCAA where teams have about 8-month experience overall.
Hear Jake Scott and Ben Anderson every day from 10 to noon on 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone. You're locked on to Hans Olsen and Scotty G. That's right. Yeah! On 97.5 The KSL Sports Zone.
Hans and Scotty, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. It's our bracket preview show with Ken Pomeroy right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. All right, let's get to some of these other number 1 seeds. Let's start with, we've talked about UConn. We've talked about Houston. Let's go North Carolina. Lost to NC State in the ACC tournament. That was a great story, watching NC State win 5 games in 5 days. But North Carolina, a little bit of a surprise as a 1 seed, or was it a surprise as a 1 seed?
Well, I think based on the resume, they weren't a surprise. You can compare their resume to anybody else. Iowa State, Tennessee, I think were the other contenders. The resumes were pretty similar, so it wasn't a huge surprise. Maybe the surprise is, they're 9th in my rating, so they're not as strong as the other ones. They're, we mentioned coaches coming after the Big 12, and a lot of those coaches that came after the Big 12 were in the ACC. So North Carolina trying to defend the honor of the ACC as a 1 seed, and that that region isn't particularly difficult, but Arizona is rated slightly higher, so actually kind of the favorite to come out of that region. So it's going to be interesting to see what Carolina does. They've been building for this moment for a while. Armando Bacot coming back to play for them for a 5th year. R.J. Davis, another senior. So it's it's been all building for this year to kind of culminate in North Carolina making a deep run. So we'll see how it plays out there.
You mentioned some of the names on that team, but what is the best attribute of this North Carolina team being a 1 seed?
Yeah, they're a solid defense. They're playing a little more up-tempo this year. When Hubert Davis took over, he didn't really inherit the Roy Williams mindset of more of an up-tempo offense, but they've gotten back to that this season and had some effectiveness with that. Their offense isn't all that impressive, but they do have the 6th-ranked defense, and so that's where they can really make things difficult for their opponent.
And then on the flip side, Purdue, I'm really hoping I get to see Purdue, and that means I'm calling a W against TCU. But Utah State, if they win, will most likely play Purdue as much as we'd like to see a Danny Sprinkle Montana State matchup in the round of 32. Likelihood of that's pretty slim. But Purdue, the number 1 seed, Zach Edney, obviously, everybody knows about him and what he's done. But Purdue, give me your thoughts on him and or your thoughts on that program.
Right. Well, if people are familiar with what Purdue did last year, obviously losing in the first round after having a really nice regular season. It's almost the exact same team coming back. Zach Edey's been awesome. He's a force of nature. He's clearly the best player in college basketball. And then he's surrounded by role players who have stepped up this year. Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, their backcourt, have improved. They brought in a transfer, Lance Jones, who is another guard that is a solid player and a good shooter. So they are a little bit better this year, kind of all the way around the board. I would love to see an Edey Osobor matchup in the middle. Both of those players just draw fouls in incredible amounts, so it might end up being a free throw shooting contest, but pretty interesting.
Edey essentially wins your Player of the Year standings. Do you hand out like trophies, or how do you ship off a trophy to Purdue?
I don't, but if there's any trophy makers listening to the show, I'd be happy to do it.
That'd be kind of fun to do.
It would, and when I started, when I came up with this Player of the Year like 10 years ago or so, I thought I would do that. Just come up with like a weird, goofy-looking trophy with a bunch of numbers on it or something, but I could never pull the trigger.
Just looking at the numbers on this, he wins this, and not by a slight margin, like by a large amount. Is that about as big a differential? I have not tracked that much at all.
Right.
Is usually your winner heads and tails above everybody else,
No.
or is this one pretty unique?
Absolutely, yeah. This is easily the most dominant single-season performance that a player's had since I've been tracking. He also won 24 MVPs, game MVPs. So I give MVPs for each game based on the stats, and 24 in one season is already a single-season record, and obviously he'll be able to add to that.
The next best, Edey's got 24. Xavier Johnson, Enrique Freeman, and Shahada Wells from East State, and I guess Deron Holmes of Dayton have 16. That's the next best. That's incredible.
What all goes into the Ken Pom metrics for you to pick that Player of the Year?
It's really just looking at there's 2 components to it. One is like the player contribution to the team. So, how much they contribute to the team in terms of their efficiency and how involved they are in the offense. And there's some of the defensive stats that are included as well. And then there's a team component as well, so how good the team is.
Okay.
So both of those things go into the mix. And
so wins and losses play in. Weekly, you said weekly conference honors?
No. Just their contributions to the team. So, Edey's usage is off the charts in that offense, and Purdue's one of the best teams in the country. So you put those two together, and there's nobody else who's even close.
So just staying in the Midwest for a second, you're seeing the highest seeded SEC team in Tennessee as a 2 seed. And the SEC got a bunch of bids, Ken, but their highest seed was Tennessee. So talk a little bit about the SEC and specifically where Tennessee fits into all this equation.
Well, the SEC was the most entertaining conference in the country because a lot of their teams, they did one of 2 things. They either played at a fast pace or they weren't totally committed to the defensive end, or both. So that led to
as you were mentioning with Auburn.
That led to a lot of high-scoring games. A lot of games in the 80s and 90s, and a bunch of games where teams scored over 100. So, really entertaining league. Tennessee fit that profile in the sense that they did play somewhat up-tempo. They do have a really good defense. Both Tennessee and Auburn, the reason they're highly rated in my system is they both had great defenses. But then you had teams like Alabama and Kentucky and Florida who did not play good defense. Good offenses, but did not play good defenses. Really up-tempo, so really high-scoring games. But those teams are probably not particularly built to make deep runs. But certainly Tennessee and Auburn are 2 teams to watch.
All right, 2 o'clock straight up, live at JCW's here in Lehigh. We'll get more into your bracket coming up next. If you got questions, we'd love to hear from you. You can tweet at us at 97.5hands, at Scotty G Zone. Ken Pomeroy, again, get to kenpom.com, a favorite website out there. If you're a college basketball fan, that is a must. It's been around forever. Ken does such a tremendous job and has been doing it for, 25, 26 years now?
About 20 years with, 6 years backfilled prior to that. Yeah.
Oh, okay, because, I see we can get stats back to 99.
Yes.
That's crazy. Just an incredible amount of work put together. Ken Pomeroy, kenpom.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Ken Pomeroy as well. But get those questions in. We'll take a deeper dive. Of course, we got to ask the obligatory, what's Ken's most logical 5-12 upset? Any other teams that we should be keeping an eye on that aren't necessarily being talked about? All of those coming up next, live at JCW's in Lehigh. Again, Hans, let's get some food in you, too.
Well, that's what it's all about at JCW's. And I know our listeners out there, they've experienced it. It is the best food that you can find when it comes to burgers, or even I've been talking about their fish and chips. And, Scotty, they're using halibut in their fish and chips right now. It's a fresh halibut. It's a house-made batter. It is freshly fried. Nothing is left under a heating lamp and soaks in a bunch of grease. It's all crispy. It's all incredible and juicy and fresh. So I love their fish and chips. I can't talk highly enough about it. But if you're really trying to cut the calories, and maybe some of you are out there, you do have the salad options. And they've got all kinds of different salad options for you. But I love to just come in. Like, for instance, they've got, 10 screens in here every corner. We're going to be out here for the NCAA tournament. Now, my favorite thing to do is when I've got a big game or something that I want to watch, I come down to JCW's. I order up a dozen of their wings. And they've got some classic buffalo wings that are just amazing with their house-made blue cheese and their house-made ranch. So please come down, enjoy JCW's. I love the crew. I love Clay, one of the original owners and creators at JCW's. I just love the group down here. They've always been so good to me, and their food is perfection.
JCW's in Lehigh right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.